Welcome back, everyone. My name is Joshua Caraballo. I am the Managing Director of Research here at NIFI, or at NIFI, I should say. That's the National Endowment for Financial Education. It's a pleasure to be here. My first time being here with you folks at the Cherry Blossom Financial Education Institute. Well, what a wonderful keynote address that we just had. Thank you for that. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our first session. Just a little bit of housekeeping. There will be two presenters today. They will have 20 minutes to provide their presentation, after which we will open up the floor for about 10 minutes of Q&A. Our first presenter, and please forgive me, Professor, because I'm about to destroy your name, Professor Tabia Bahur Karurin, and my apologies. I might have been close. From the University of Mannheim, the name of her presentation is Disparities in Financial Literacy, Pension Planning, and Saving Behavior. Professor, thank you.
So thank you very much for the nice introduction and also the opportunity to present my work here at this great meeting. So actually, I was a little bit surprised when I arrived yesterday because it's so hot here. In Germany, we still have winter, so we're still developing in that respect. But actually, interestingly, Germany is also, in terms of financial literacy, quite a developing country because we only had a couple of weeks ago a first national event where actually our Minister of Education and Research, together with the Minister of Finance, recognized financial literacy as an important topic for their policies. So I think we're a little bit behind, but we're hopefully going to catch up in the future. Anyways, so today this talk is not about the German financial education or financial literacy policy, but it's rather about a field experiment that we ran with some colleagues in Frankfurt on pension information, and it's not a robo-advisor, but it's an app that can help individuals get an overview of their potential future pension income, and we tested in a large field experiment how that might potentially change people's feeling of being informed about their pension, but also about how it changes their saving behavior. The work is motivated by a development that has not only taken place in Germany, but also in many other countries that have reformed their pension systems in the past 20 to 30 years and have moved from the individual or single-pillar pension system to multi-pillar pension systems. And so that makes, prompts two trends. And first of all, it shifts the responsibility for sufficient retirement income to the individual, which is a trend that has been recognized for a long time. But at the same time, it also makes pension planning much more complex because in order to get an idea of what your future pension income might be, individuals actually have to add up potential pension incomes from different sources, and that's really not trivial to do. Because the type of information that individuals are presented with comes at different points in times, it comes in different letters, the different numbers are labeled different, the scenarios are all different, so this whole thing is completely unstandardized. So I don't know about the system in the US, but in Germany this is a mess. So you get like pages and pages of fine print with different assumptions and different labels on these numbers, and so it really takes forever to compile these numbers into an overview. And many people actually don't even try to do it. And so we started out with this process with the idea, well, if you want to get people to plan for their pension, the first thing they need to do is assess the status quo. So where do we start from? And even that is something that many people fail to do. And so the idea here is, can digitalization actually help individuals get such an overview? And what's the potential of these pension aggregation tools in helping people plan for their pensions and save? And so in recent years, there have actually been quite a number of policy initiatives in different European countries that have introduced these pension platforms where people can get an overview of their different pensions from different pillars. So the Danish were actually the leaders in that respect. So they introduced such a platform already in 1999. And there is a platform in Sweden, one in Norway, and also the Netherlands followed suit. And at the moment, we have discussions going on in the UK and in Germany. The German platform is supposed to go online this year. I've seen some preparations of it, but I'm actually looking forward how the final thing looks like. However, at the moment, there is very little empirical evidence how these platforms actually help individuals plan for their pensions and whether it makes a difference. And so the research questions that we would like to answer in this paper is whether the simplification of this pension information actually helps individuals, and in particular those with low financial literacy, get an idea of what the future pensions that they can expect look like, and then take action. And so what we have here is a field experiment. So the treatment is a pension dashboard that we programmed together with a small fintech company. And we ran field experiments where we invited customers of 2 large German retail banks to use this tool to get an overview of their pensions. And then we were collecting survey data before they participated, and then in 2 surveys after participation. And we were able to link the data that we collected in the tool with the 3 surveys, plus administrative bank data, in order to see how they actually change bank balances in different accounts that they're holding with these 2 banks in order to see what the impact is. So in total, we have multiple data sources that we're all going to try to link together to learn something about how digital tools can actually have an impact on individuals' pension planning. So we're linked to rather big literature, both in terms of pension planning and wealth accumulation, but also on how financial education can work and help individuals make better financial choices. And then we're also linked to the literature on how information can have an impact on saving and investment choices of individuals. And in particular, there is already some research on how the letters, the pension information letters from the public systems influence people's financial knowledge and saving choices. So there is one for Germany that's published in the Journal of Public Economics. That's the Dolz et al. Paper. Then the Goda paper actually looks at pension forecasts in occupational pension systems. And then there is the Mastroboni paper that is also looking into the effect of the Social Security Statement letter and how it impacts saving decisions of individuals. And so what we're adding to this is actually broader, because we're not just giving people information on the potential pensions they can expect from a specific pension contract or one pillar. But we're doing is we're taking information that they already have, because they have all these letters. And the service we are providing is we're aggregating this information and presenting it in a different way. So basically, we're taking 5 numbers and presenting 1. So that's all we do. So that's the treatment. Nothing, we're not adding information, nothing. Yeah? So what do our, now let me try if I can move around, our experimental groups and our timing look like. So we have, in principle, 4 groups of participants that we can work with. Let me start with the bottom one, because it's the easiest and the one that you're quick to understand. So that's the treatment group. The treatment group was invited to participate in an experiment on pension planning via the log out page of the online banking of one of the 2 banks that cooperated. And then they were invited to participate in a survey. In that survey, we asked them about general attitudes towards pensions, how important it is, how well informed they feel themselves. We asked them questions about subjective financial literacy. We asked them the big 3 financial literacy questions, etc. So pretty pretty standard stuff. Then we invited the treatment group guys to participate in and register for our pension dashboard service. And then they uploaded their pension documents in the service. Then we had a group of students in the background that compiled all the numbers from these documents into one number. So this was a manual process that took place in the background. And if the documents were incomplete or if something was unclear, they wrote emails or phoned with these people back and forth in order to get everything ready. And then in the end, they produced 1,061 of these pension dashboards. And then on average, it took our students about a bit less than half an hour to do one of these dashboards. So you can imagine how much effort went into producing this pension overview, because it had to be done manually at that point in time, because there is no automatic data transfer possible at the moment, because these numbers are not standardized. Then when the dashboard was ready, they received an email that their dashboard was complete, and then they could log into this service again and look at their numbers. And when they finished that, they took a second survey where we basically assessed how helpful they found what they saw. And then about half a year to up to 8 months, depending on when they got the treatment, after they were invited to participate in a third survey. Then, in addition to that, we have the bank administrative data on some of the demographics, and then also on their saving accounts and all other products they hold with these banks. And we have this data for 12 months before the intervention and for up to 8 months after the intervention. Then we have an assigned to treatment group, because this was actually a rather demanding task, because they had to upload all the documents themselves. And we actually already anticipated that many people might drop out at this stage because it's just too demanding to find these products. And so for these guys, at least we have information from the first survey, and we have administrative bank data. So we know who dropped out, and we can actually use them to estimate ITT effects. Then what we also have is a control group that was randomly just invited to participate in the survey and never was invited to participate in the dashboard. And then we have a so-called zero-touch group, which is just a randomly group of clients drawn from the bank for which we have the administrative data so that we can know who actually responded to our invitations, and we can basically take out all the time fixed effects and everything using that group. So it's a pretty rich data set that we can work with. Okay, so how did such a dashboard look like? So what we provided was personalized information about future pension incomes from all three pillars of the pension system. So we included the public system, potentially multiple private pension contracts, and potentially multiple occupational pension contracts. Because, for example, in Germany, the portability of occupational pensions is pretty low. So if you change your employer, usually you keep your old pension pot and then you just open a new one. So if people have many employers, then depending on whether the occupational pension is offered or not, they have multiple of these occupational pension pots. And then what we do is we aggregate the information from all the letters that they uploaded into an aggregate overview over the accumulated pensions, and we present them as gross and net potential income. So there is a tax calculator that just approximates what could be there in terms of net. And then we differentiate into guaranteed pensions and potential additional pensions, because for many of these pension contracts, there's actually risk involved. And so it's not entirely clear how much to expect, because there are different scenarios that you could imagine how your pension income evolves. And as I already said, it's just a compilation of existing information. So there's no additional scenarios, no additional information there. We're just taking the numbers from these different letters and we're presenting them in one. Then, just to give you an idea, participants uploaded on average 4.5 products. So these are quite complex portfolios. The average projected retirement income is over 3,000 euros. So these are pretty high income people that we have in this experiment. And I already said that it took about 24 minutes for one dashboard to be compiled. Then a couple of important variables that we're going to work with. The first one is a self-assessed subjective pension overview. That's basically our the manipulation check, so whether people actually found it helpful what we did. And this was assessed in the first and in the third survey, and we're going to look at changes for the treatment and the control group. Then we're looking at saving balances, so that's a saving account balance at the end of each month in euros, taken from administrative bank records for 12 months prior to the intervention and up to 8 months after. And then we're also looking at total financial wealth held at this bank, and that's equal to the sum of the saving account, transfer account, and portfolio balances, also taken from the administrative records. Then we have a financial literacy measure. That's the big three, financial literacy big three standard questions. And we are adding a fourth one on compounding interest, because basically our sample here, because there were people that were on average highly educated with high average incomes, they were rather good at answering these questions. So we have 82% 3 correct. And to get basically more variation into the financial literacy measure, we added this fourth harder question to kind of analyze the variation in the response to the treatment depending on financial literacy. We're going to do a sample split using OR4 questions. So the high literacy group are the people that got all 4 of these questions correct. That's about 39% of our sample. And the low literacy group is everybody who didn't get 4 correct. So in terms of the summary statistics, you can see that it's a selected group of people because they self-selected voluntarily based on the interest in the topic, so to say. So that's always a problem with field experiments. That does not harm the estimation of a causal effect, but it puts into question external validity in the sense that it's hard to predict how a sample of less literate, less rich clients would respond to the type of treatment that we're offering. Now, since I only have about 1 minute left, let me show you the most important results. So that's our manipulation check, and what you can see here is the change in the subjective pension overview. And the most important thing is that we actually got quite a big change in the treatment group, so people actually found it helpful what we presented. Now, that's the descriptive statistics of the saving and the wealth balance, but let me go straight to our estimation results. So what we're going to do is estimate a difference in difference model and a dynamic difference in difference model. And because we have so rich data also on our control and zero touch group, what we can do is we can estimate this model using individual fixed effect and time fixed effect. And that basically takes out not just differences in observable characteristics, but all the differences in unobservable characteristics between our treatment and control group. So basically all the selections effects that you saw before are taking care of these fixed effects, right? So we have a setting where we truly can estimate a causal effect taking care also of the self-selection into the treatment. Now, let me jump ahead. So these are our main results for the saving balances, and what you can see here are the estimated beta coefficient for all the time periods. You can see that the gray line is the estimation for the full sample. You can see a small positive effect that is only significant in one period. However, when we split the sample into the low financial literacy and high financial literacy people, you can see that the positive effect in terms of the saving balances is entirely driven by the people with the ex-ante low financial literacy. So they are the guys that respond to the treatment and increase saving balances after they received the pension overview. Now, we played around a lot with different measures, so that these are the results for the active savers. So active savers are the guys that have movements in their saving accounts prior to the intervention, because what you could be worried about is that we only observe financial behavior at this one bank, so they might actually respond on other accounts outside the bank. Now, when we look at the active savers, we know that these are the guys that actively use their saving account before. They are more likely to respond at this bank. And here then we also have the significant overall treatment effect, so not just when we do the sample split. But you can see again that it's entirely driven by the low financial literacy people. Same thing for wealth, so overall wealth balances that we're looking at. And then we estimate the intention to treat effect and the total effect on the treated. Now we actually have, and I didn't present these numbers, but we have substantial dropout. So we only have about 14% compliance because it was so difficult for people to find all the documents and upload them in the tool. So when we scale this up, actually, the ITT effect only becomes significant in 2 post-treatment periods because it's just a very small number relative to the total number of the treated. So it's not surprising that the effect is little, but the patterns are still there. And then if we actually weight the ITT effect by the fraction of the treated, then that's what we get here. And in terms of the absolute size of the effect, we're back to our old ballpark of the numbers. So it all makes sense. Good, so many more robustness checks that you can look up in the paper. Overall, our conclusions are offering these types of tools can actually be very helpful for people to get an overview about their future pension income and potentially also triggers saving responses, especially among individuals with ex-ante low financial literacy. And so overall, providing better pension information or providing better forecast overviews could potentially help individuals in making better preparation for their pension. Now, the caveat, as I already said, is external validity. So participants in our experiment were high income, high education, predominantly male, high financial literacy. So we really have to learn more about how to get people with less favorable features to participate in such tools because they could potentially benefit even more from the use of these tools. Thanks a lot.
All right, there it is. Thank you so much. So we'll now open it up for some questions from the audience, and I'll bring you this so you can speak into the mic. Carly?
Yeah, thank you. This is super interesting. Are you surprised at all about the potential decline, or at least suggestive decline, for the high financial literacy group? You would think that they know how to make that number on their own. Were they like panic over saving before, and now they're like, oh, I can actually spend some of this?
Yeah. So this effect or the decline for the high financial literacy group actually puzzled us a lot. One thing is, it's actually never significant, not a single one of them. So it's rather noisy decline, but the decline is always there. So that first. Second, I think it could be related to, so if you're unsecure about the future, so like if you're assigning higher risk to the potential outcome, then if you're risk averse, people should actually oversave in a sense. And so if we are reducing the noise with the information that we're giving, a reduction in savings is one of the potential outcomes. And so it's theoretically, this is there, but we didn't ask people explicitly for this. So if we were ever to run something like that again, we would have to spend much more time and effort in the pre-participation survey to ask specifically for expectations from all these different products and what exactly they think and how much planning they did in more detail. So here we wanted to keep this in entry survey rather compact because we didn't want to lose too many people already in that survey. So we only had like 30 questions or something, and only very easy questions, but that's something that we would have to redo in the future if we had the chance. Yeah.
I don't know if you, I don't know which. I will go. Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot for the presentation. My first comment is very related with Carly's one. So also in my case, I thought that was pretty strange. Probably it's related to the total wealth of the high financial literate people, because probably that issue and your results will be larger if you present the relative values on total wealth. So at that point, has probably highly literate people have a higher income. At that point, the line would be very close to the x-axis, while the one for low illiterate people would be higher. The saving divided by the total wealth, I mean.
But the level effects are all taken out by the fixed effect.
Yeah, I know, but in the graph. So if you put in the graph your estimated effects on saving divided by the total wealth of individuals.
Okay.
Yeah. And my second
question. Have to think about it.
So I think if you just interpret that size and say like
as a relative, yeah.
Big?
Yeah.
You could have just, if you answered my question and said this is small,
it's rather big relative, because they have an average financial wealth held at the bank of like between 20 and 25,000 euros. So it's not. It's rather big.
And my second question, very briefly, is on the fact, so if I understood correctly, the people are selected into the treatment when they go in the bank's website. So I was wondering if you have some information on the control group as regards the use of the bank's website. So if they go as well there, or at the opposite, if the number of times they go physically to the banks just to control for.
So the control group is also recruited through the bank's website. It's just on some days they were redirected to the survey, and some days they were redirected to the participation. So basically the treatment and the control group are all online bank clients. The only thing is this zero-touch group, this random number of clients. They are in the people that we included in the regression are also online banking clients. So we never included in the regressions the guys that never go to the online service of the bank. But we have information on them, so we can also use them. But they tend to be older and yeah. Thank you. Good.
Hi, sorry. Do we have time?
Yes, this will be our last question.
Okay, sorry. Actually, the two last questions I also have two. So one is also related to the job for the high literacy people. I was wondering whether that might be that they switch to some insurance product. So for instance, if they buy like a Riester-Vertrag or so, that those are usually distributed by insurance companies. So maybe you cannot capture that because it's not in the bank. And the second question was, how do you actually differentiate high and low financial literacy? Is it either all three of the questions are correct or zero? And if so, what would be the fraction? Because you said already the sample has a high financial literacy, so I would be wondering how many of them are actually in the low financial literacy section if they're already kind of pre-selected to have high financial literacy.
So first of all, the saving reactions outside of the bank, we cannot capture them because we don't have the data on that. What we do is we look at overall wealth. So if they our first suspicion was that, well, to have an adjustment on a saving account is actually not the most clever thing to do. Actually, you should look for something where you actually get a return. And so that's why we then included the overall wealth measure. And and so we actually there we don't find another effect for the high financial literacy clients. So it's also negative if you look at the overall. So yeah, we can't really do anything about that. The second question, financial literacy, yes, of course, I see. So the sample split at the moment is whether all 4 questions are answered correctly versus only less than 4. We played around with the sample splits a little bit. The overall patterns remain the same. We also present results using subjective financial literacy on this 7-point Likert scale. And if we do the median split there, we find the same results. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Professor Paulina Medina from Texas A&M University, and the title of her presentation is Do Savings Nudges Cause Borrowing? Evidence from a Mega Study.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to the organizers for including our paper in the program. This is joint work with Michaela Pagel, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and comments over the next day and a half. Let me start by pointing out that nudges are a policy tool of growing popularity. And in particular, when it comes to promoting savings, as we just seen, there are a number of policies currently in place using nudges to encourage individuals to save. The implicit assumption in these policies is that these increases in savings out of nudges are financed with reductions in consumption. However, due to design features of data limitations, most studies are not able to see where is the money coming from. And instead, they focus on the most immediate outcomes, namely whether or not there are increases in savings, or as we just saw, what are the levers that can lead individuals to increase their savings. So in this paper, we're going to fill that gap to actually see how these increases in savings are financed, and in particular, whether these increases in savings are financed with increases in debt. We think this question is relevant because it has direct implications for policy design. In the end, policymakers implicitly want an increase in net savings and not an increase in savings that is financed with high interest debt, like, for example, credit card debt. And this concern that savings may be financed with debt becomes all the more relevant when we note that there is a non-trivial fraction of people that simultaneously hold low interest savings and high interest debt, giving rise to a phenomenon known as the credit card debt puzzle. The credit card debt puzzle precisely studies this co-holding of low interest savings and high interest debt. So in this paper, we're going to speak to this question of how are savings out of nudges being financed, and we're going to do that with a large field experiment in which 3.1 million clients of a bank in Mexico were encouraged to save. The main lever for these experiments are going to be SMS messages. And one important feature of our analysis is that we're going to have access to a rich panel data set that is going to have information on transactions, on debit and credit card accounts, and it's also going to have information on balances in these credit and debit card accounts. Importantly, we're going to be able to distinguish between credit card debt and credit card balances. This is an important distinction because if we are convenience users, you use your credit card as a payment method and you pay your bill in full every month, you're not going to be charged interest for those balances. Nevertheless, in the credit bureau, for example, you're going to come up as having credit card balances, but those balances are not going to be credit card debt. And this is important because previous work looking at similar questions has focused on credit bureau data. In credit bureau data, you get credit card balances. You don't get any information on credit card interest. You don't get any information on credit card debt. And similarly, in our data, we're also able to see spending. That is, what are you using your money for? How much money are you withdrawing on an ATM? Where are you swiping your credit card? Where are you swiping your debit card? And again, that's information that is not available in credit bureau data. And we think that this additional data availability is going to allow us to expand a little bit the conversation and move beyond simply looking at what's going on with saving balances and instead explain changes in the balance sheet of individuals with changes in their spending patterns. So in this paper, we're going to do just that, look at where the money is coming from. And in doing so, we're going to provide new facts about this credit card debt puzzle that I mentioned earlier, because we're going to find particularly interesting results for individuals that increase their savings while holding credit card debt. And we're going to do that using state-of-the-art techniques to study treatment effect heterogeneity. The reason for that is that we think that the spillover question is really relevant for individuals that increase their savings as a result of the treatment. If you don't increase your savings as a result of the treatment, the question of where's the money coming from is much less relevant. And we think it's natural to imagine that not everyone is going to respond to a saving nudge with the same intensity. So what we're going to do is that we're going to focus on individuals who have the largest predicted response to the treatment. And at this point, you may be a little bit worried that if we pick and choose individuals for whom we observe the largest response to the treatment, we may just be picking up noise. And specifically, that noise that is leading to spuriously large increases in savings may also be affecting your borrowing decisions. So we're going to take that concern very carefully, and we're going to use one of these relatively new methods for machine learning for causal inference that are precisely to study treatment effect heterogeneity without fears of overfitting. Specifically, we're going to use a causal forest that is going to allow us to recover individual level predictions of treatment effects. So using this method, we're basically going to build a score of who's more likely to respond or not. We're going to sort individuals by that score, and we're going to focus on the top 25% of the distribution, who are the individuals who are more likely to respond to the treatment. And for them, we're going to look at what is the response to the nudge in terms of savings, of course, but also importantly, instead of credit card borrowing, in terms of spending, and in terms of credit card repayment. And in a nutshell, what we found is that if we focus on these individuals that respond the most to the savings nudge, we see that there is a 6.1% increase in savings. Think of these numbers that are in Mexican pesos as basically 10 Mexican pesos per dollar, PPP. So we're seeing that there is an increase of basically $200 in savings out of receiving these SMS messages. And these increases in savings are not related to increases in debt. In particular, because we have a large sample size, we're going to be able to rule out increases in borrowing costs of more than 1 penny, no? And which gives us some confidence that among this population, a large increase in savings is not financed with credit card debt. If it's not coming from that, where is the money coming from? It's actually coming from reductions in spending, and in particular is coming from reductions in ATM withdrawals. But importantly, because as I told you earlier, we're able to observe credit card interest and we're able to see who's borrowing on their credit card, we can actually go on and zoom in on individuals who had credit card debt at baseline. These are individuals that are paying credit card interest on their credit card. Well, it turns out that for them, we have a very similar effect in terms of savings. Still, we have a close to 6% increase in savings. For them, we again don't find additional debt. They don't borrow more. However, they don't use those savings to pay off their debt. So in a way, this saving nudge led to some exacerbation of this simultaneous holding of low interest savings and high interest debt. In addition, we also find that these saving decisions are uncorrelated with the probability of rolling over credit card debt. They turn out to be uncorrelated with credit card interest rates themselves. And we also find that there is no evidence of treatment effect heterogeneity in borrowing. That is, this null effect that we're finding in terms of the borrowing response is pretty homogeneous. No one in our sample is borrowing as a result of the treatment, or at least we're not able to detect any borrowing as a result of the treatment. So let me tell you a little bit more about experimental design. As I was saying, we start with a sample of 3 million customers. About a little bit more than 10% of them are assigned to a control group, and the remaining are assigned to a treatment group. Of course, this is random assignment. The intervention lasted 7 weeks. During these 7 weeks, individuals received SMS messages encouraging them to save. They also received some messages in the ATM screens, but only after the transactions were made. The logic of the experimental pool was that to train an algorithm to identify who responds to the treatment and who doesn't respond to the treatment, I need to make sure that there are enough people that we think that will not respond to the treatment and that will respond to the treatment as well. Otherwise, the algorithm is not going to be able to learn. And the way we implement that is by really imposing very minimal restrictions, very minimal constraints, and in particular, we don't impose activity constraints. So in this sample, we have individuals for which we think maybe they will not respond to the treatment, and we also have individuals for which we think maybe they'll respond to the treatment. And we do that to be able to learn, to be able to train this algorithm to learn who responds and who doesn't. The messages that were sent the messages were a selection of 7 messages that were previously used by this partner bank in their own A/B testing. These messages don't pin down a particular behavioral cue. Instead, you can think of them as a combination of commitment, anchoring, something about peer effects as well. But because our main interest is really on figuring out this spillover effect, and we want to do that with as much statistical precision as we can, we're going to pull all those treatments into a single dummy that takes the value of 1 when an individual receives any of these messages and takes the value of 0 otherwise. The first set of results that I'm going to show you are the aggregate treatment effects of the intervention. And the first thing to note is that, as you can see, and as we would expect, we find a small but positive treatment effect on checking account balances. This is just a little bit over half of a percentage point increase in checking account balances, which is not surprising because we're doing this with the whole 3.1 million people that intentionally include people for who would expect a null response to the treatment and a positive response to the treatment. If we focus on individuals who have a credit card, we find a 1.4% increase, and among them, even right here in the aggregate terms, we can see that there is no increase in borrowing. But of course, you may be thinking, there's no increase in borrowing because the increase in savings is small. Yes, and that's exactly the logic for why we were looking at treatment effect heterogeneity. So when we apply this causal forward method, as I mentioned, we recover this individual level prediction of treatment effects. That is, for each of our 3.1 million guys, we have one variable that is a score such that a higher score is going to be correlated with a higher treatment effect of the intervention. A lower score is going to be correlated with a lower treatment effect of the intervention. And we can plot these scores. And we can then split individuals into 4 groups based on this score. We would expect people with a high value of the score to have a large treatment effect, people with a low value of the score to have a low treatment effect. And that's what we do in the left picture over here that you can see in the screen. We split individuals into quartiles, 750,000 people in each quartile. In each quartile, there are people in the treatment and in the control group in the same proportion. So we can calculate treatment effects the standard way. And we can see that basically the algorithm is identifying 2 groups. A lot of people that don't respond to the treatment and a group of people that responds to the treatment. We think that the spillover question is particularly relevant for this group, the group that responds to the treatment. So we're going to focus on them. If we focus on individuals in the top quartile of predicted treatment effects, now we can meaningfully ask, where is the money coming from? And when we focus on the top quartile of predicted treatment effects, we can calculate treatment effects on checking account balances, on credit card balances, on credit card interest, which is our preferred measure of credit card borrowing, and on the probability of paying credit card interest. In the top section of this panel, we have individuals, all clients in the top quartile, who have a credit card. And for them, as I told you earlier, we find a 6% increase in savings with null effects on credit card borrowing. For individuals in the bottom section of this table, these are individuals who were paying credit card interest at baseline. We have a similar response, a 5% increase in savings, no increases in borrowing. But importantly, I can see what you use those savings for. I can move forward in time and see what did you do with that money. Did you use it to pay off your credit card debt? And turns out that they did not use that money to pay off the credit card debt. If the money is not coming from credit card debt, where is it coming from? Well, we see maybe people are making more deposits, maybe they are withdrawing less on their ATM, or maybe they are swiping their cards less, and we have evidence for the latter two, especially for less ATM withdrawals. And to give you some perspective of this puzzling behavior of the simultaneous holding of low interest savings and high interest debt, let me tell you a little bit about the prices in this market. The average interest rate in this market is 35%, and the checking accounts that we have here pay precisely a 0% return. Nevertheless, around 13% of individuals who pay credit card interest are keeping substantial amount of cash in their checking account to an extent that it costs them around 5% of their monthly income. The interest charges are costing them, representing 5% of their monthly income. But the credit card puzzle is not new. There's a large literature that has looked into it, and there are several explanations for it. The first set of explanations can be thought of as liquidity management explanations. There is this logic such that negative debt is not the same as cash. An open line of credit is not as good as cash. And the reason for that can be because maybe there are some transactions that I cannot pay with my credit card. Think about your mortgage payments. You don't pay your mortgage with credit card debt, right? It could also be because there is uncertainty around your credit limits. If I have an open line of credit, no one guarantees that that line of credit is going to be open when I need it the most, because banks can reduce your credit limit in bad times. So because of that, it's possible that for an insurance purpose, individuals may want to keep cash holdings even though they have credit card debt, and that's one explanation in the literature. There's a second family of explanations related to mental accounting. The explanations related to mental accounting basically said that individuals make decisions in two accounts. There's something that is a savings account, and there's something that is a borrowing account, and these two don't speak to each other because in their mind this money is not fungible. And in this logic, the typical explanation, the model of Berthoud and Gelasius, is that if I have credit card debt, I may choose not to pay it off. Because if I pay my credit card debt, I'm going to be facing with a very tempting open line of credit. There's nothing more tempting than a credit card with zero balance. And if I'm facing this credit card with zero balance with an open line of credit, the impatient person inside of me may want to spend it all. So if I pay off my credit card, I'm effectively spending off my savings because my impatient self is going to ramp up spending all the way to the level that I had before. So we think that our findings can actually help us speak to which of these two explanations is the dominant one in the incremental credit card debt puzzle that we found. No? And the way to think about it is that we need to find a mapping between an experimental design and these models. And we explore a few possibilities. The first one is that this saving not just a preference shock that can make me more patient. If I become more patient, maybe the way to think about it is that I already have my liquidity needs covered. I'm already optimizing because I know that I cannot pay my mortgage with my credit card, and I know that my bank may reduce my credit limit when I need it the most, so I'm holding a certain amount of cash. And all of a sudden, I become more patient. What does that mean? That I need more, I want to consume more in the future. If you want to do that, what's the best way for you to transfer money to the future? The best way for you to transfer money to the future is to pay off your existing debt. Well, that's actually not what we found in the data, because in the data we found that there are increases in checking account balances and there are no reductions in debt and there are no repayments on credit cards as a result of the treatment. In contrast, mental accounting models predict something different. If I make my saving and borrowing decisions in 2 different accounts, the fact that I become more patient means that the only way for me to send money to the future is by increasing my checking account. Because if I use that money to pay off my credit card, that money is not going to be available in the future, because my impatient self is going to ramp up the debt today. So mental accounting models have a different prediction. They say that if you become more patient, you're going to increase your checking account balances, and there are going to be no changes in your credit card debt. In the paper, we discuss other potential mappings between the experiment and these models. But overall, what we find is that whenever debt and saving decisions are made jointly, the saving and borrowing decisions are going to speak to each other. When you change your savings, there's something that's going to happen to your debt. However, whereas in mental accounting models, that's not the case. Saving and borrowing decisions are made separately, and that is very consistent with the increases in savings that we found without changes in debt. In the paper, we discuss additional pieces of evidence that are consistent with the mental accounting explanation. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to conclude by noting that, to our knowledge, there's only one other paper that speaks to this question of where is the money coming from. And we think that relative to that paper, we're bringing to the table a lot of things, because we're able to see rollover debt, we're able to see spending, and we're able to speak to these joint decisions of saving and borrowing. And we do that with this large-scale field experiment that shows us that savings out of notches are not financed with new debt. Notches lead to net increases in savings regardless of your pre-existing levels of debt. And the evidence suggests that part of this co-holding puzzle comes from the fact that individuals make saving and borrowing decisions in different mental accounts. Thank you.
All right, very interesting. Let's get to the questions.
Sorry, I'm eager today. Very interesting. I love that you call this a mega study. I'm going to steal that at some point when I do a study that's this big. So I think one question I have that's pulling me away from buying completely your liquidity story is we always hear things like, you need 3 months in checking, or you need like a fixed amount, and after that, that's when you should start paying down debt. Have you done anything to see, like, you know, is there some type of level effect where after you have a certain amount of savings, you get there? So you would have to do some sample split based on a baseline checking account amount. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you could do it by income or by spending patterns.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually have a lot of information, and instead of doing this sample splitting, I don't know if I mentioned, we actually use like 160 covariates, all at the same thing, all at the same time to speak to the statement of heterogeneity. We do find that individuals that respond the most, which will be the alternative to this sample splitting, have higher checking account balances, but they do not have as large income. So we think that this is kind of like more like a statement that, that saving notches are more likely to operate in the intensive margin. There's a barrier, a fixed cost that takes you from not saving at all to saving a little bit. And that we don't find as much movement there. What we find is that individuals that already had relatively higher balances, they are the ones that are responding the most. I will need to think about this threshold, right? And kind of like how it affects our story. Because we do have, right, individuals both in the treatment and control and across the spectrum of savings, right, that they are there. So maybe what you're saying is that they're still getting there. You were saying that they are not optimizing, right? That's what you were saying. I guess that the fact that these guys are already the ones that have the highest saving balances maybe speaks a little bit against that. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi. Great work, very interesting. I love it. I have sort of like a follow-up question, so I think it's good that I go. Thank you. So as you mentioned, your messages were very focused on mental accounting, right? It was like, save these, right? Have you thought about, or do you experiment with the messaging, right? Because you do have, you give the example of like people are paying 30% on interest rates, right? And then, in savings, they don't get any return. Have you thought about, doing a message that kind of gives people like savings through debt repayment, and then, give them an example of how much they will save? I mean, I know you mentioned that your messages. So I was wondering if you think findings will change, or if you experiment in that area.
Excellent. No, very interesting question for sure. So first, while we don't focus as much in the main body of the paper on the results message by message, we actually include them because I think they are able to speak a little bit to the question you have in mind, no? And some of the messages are more neutral than others, no? For example, look at the first one. Congratulations, your average balance over the last 12 months has been great, no? And that itself is going to make people, that we find that in itself leads to more savings. Message by message, the difference in treatment effect are not statistically significant. Maybe that is one first piece of evidence, that even if I show it more like mental accounting, no, you save first money box, versus just a reference to your behavior, the magnitude of the response is similar. But more generally, something that we have looked more, that I didn't bring in the slides, but the newer version of the paper is emphasizing a lot more, is that what if we don't select on savings? Because I showed you the top quartile of treatment effects on savings. What if we just select on spending? People that reduce their spending the most. Then the question becomes, how are you reducing your spending? You may reduce your spending by paying off your debt, by using less your credit card, right, and reducing your debt, or by just reducing your ATM withdrawals. And what we find is that these reductions in spending, like around 85% of the reduction in spending, it's translated into reductions in savings. So it doesn't seem that it's like this selection into we're focusing on people that are already reducing their savings, but if I don't select and I look what happens to people that reduce their spending, turns out that they are actually increasing their savings.
I have a question. So if you go to you have a slide when you have the predicted effect, that is you have this kind of nice distribution that goes positive and negative. But then if you go on the next slide, then you have that either the treatment is as a positive effect or a zero effect. I just don't understand.
Excellent. That's an excellent question. So what I have in this slide right here, these are the predicted treatment effects. Think of it as a score. So a perfectly calibrated prediction would have a closer mapping between these magnitudes and the magnitudes here. So basically, we think that all the predictions over here are noise, because they appear negative, but if I pull them all together, turns out that they are zero, right? So that is an excellent question. It actually reminded me when you were talking earlier about trust. In a separate experiment, we do find people that have a negative response to these nudges, and we think this is very much related to trust in the messenger. Not here. Here, we believe that given what we find here, our interpretation is that everything to the left is noise, and that this particular algorithm is particularly good to distinguish in the top segment of the treatment effect distribution, not so much on the left. Yes.
So I think one way to get at Carly's question is by adding another treatment, and I'm pretty sure that you don't want to redo this mega study and add another treatment, but in case anybody else is interested in doing so, if you were to add another messaging treatment where you suggested that people could either save or repay their credit card debt, and then perhaps they would, rationally optimize between the two and see whether they still selectively choose it. So you're getting there around the mental accounting or the narrow framing issue, whether they still choose to save, versus paying their credit card debt could get at that
I like
issue.
that very much, and I think it aligns very much with this kind of like moral of targeting and personalization. Maybe the one thing that we can learn from this result that we wouldn't learn as much from that one is that individuals will not do that ignoring of the message themselves, right? Because in a way, maybe some people should ignore the message, right? They are not doing that. It needs to be the choice architect that targets the right messages, and you cannot just trust of someone to say, if it doesn't apply to me, I'll ignore it, because it seems like even if it doesn't apply to them, they actually move forward and respond. But that would be an excellent extension, yes.
That's all the time we have, so we'll be back at 3:25. Thank you.